Hi everybody, hope you're all doing really good. This is Dr. Lillian Cespedes Gonzalez coming on with a public lecture for everybody to enjoy about a very important and dear woman for me, who is Kristina of Norway, a Norwegian medieval princess in Castile. Well, before I actually get on to the lecture itself, please let me give you a little bit of background as to why I am doing this, where does it all come from, and the purpose of this thing. So as part of Travolution tours, one of the things that we want to advocate for is accessibility, not just during our tours, but accessibility of knowledge. What I'm actually presenting here for you guys today is based on a paper that I did a few years ago for a seminar, for an academic seminar. Because in case you don't know or you're new to this, I have a PhD in history, hence the doctor, and I'm a historian, I'm a scholar. Well, I decided, like with many of the things that I research for academia or something else, that this knowledge didn't really just belong to me. It belongs to everyone else. History is literally everybody. And particularly, what I guess many people would consider minor characters, such as Kristina here today, just never really get enough press. A lot of what is public history in this day and age still focus around the same people. More stuff on Cleopatra. I'm not gonna throw shade on the Netflix documentary, but I'm totally throwing shade on the Netflix documentary. Whether it's more Tudors, more World War II stuff, or whatever, it ends up all being around the same thing. And there is actually about 1,000,000 things in history that deserve our attention. So, since Kristina was an important part of my research, and I thought an interesting case of what happens in history, I thought it would be a great example to bring a little bit more of awareness to the public in general as to what happens sometimes when we're doing historical research and how people just fall through the cracks. So, that's the reason why I'm doing this. Now, the other purpose of this exercise is the following. Shortly after I upload this video, not on the same day, but in the days to lead up to, I will also be uploading pretty much a direct, fresh take of the paper as I created it for this seminar. Why am I going to do this? Well, because it's not the same delivering a public lecture or talking, to people like I'm doing here in a informative but still relaxed manner than doing academic work. Now, I am actually known for being a little bit of a weird academic in any case, so it's not like my paper would be exactly like most other people's delivery of a paper, but I do really want to highlight those differences, and I want to also highlight why so much information sometimes just doesn't, get publicly consumed or distributed. The way we do things in academia is a little bit pernickety and sometimes inefficient. But, there is also a sheer amount of knowledge in terms of volume and precision that sometimes is just not really necessary to understand the importance of somebody. I sincerely doubt you don't really care all that much if somebody was born in 1123 or 1124, as long as you know they belong roughly to that period of history and they did X, Y, Z. So the paper will literally be more academic oriented in that perspective, and I am going to be recording that from the point of view of a video essay. And why am I also going to do that? Well, I actually don't really care about publishing this piece of information in an academic journal because you don't have access to an academic journal. So again, the entire point of this is to actually democratizing the access of history and information and knowledge, which should be for everybody. Now, of course, I still need to pay bills and I don't live off thin air, so there are obviously several ways you can support me, but I am not here to try and capitalize, hundreds and thousands of pounds on what traditional academia normally is all about. So this is my treat about this unknown woman from me to you that I hope you enjoy. Like I said, this is the public lecture version of the paper itself, and then I'll be uploading the paper in the upcoming days, so please keep an eye out if you want to see the differences between one and the other. And now, let's dig in and find out more about my friend Kristina. Well, so what are we going to be looking at in here today? So we're going to be finding out who actually was Kristina, because, well, she's been pretty much a mystery for a really long time. What was she doing in Spain? Because I'm sure you realize from Norway to Spain, there's quite a big geographical area to cover and probably not the kind of connection you were expecting. We're going to be talking about her wedding and her husband. Then we're going to be talking about her burial place, which is really the matter that brings the whole subject together, and why is she a mystery, particularly still in this day and age. That's what you can expect from this public lecture. All right, well, and without any further ado, let's get rolling. In search of Kristina, quotation marks. Well, the problem that we have is that Kristina of Norway is and has been really a mystery for a really long time. There are barely any sources written in English about her. And when I'm talking about sources, by the way, in case you're new to history or to academia, I'm talking about both primary sources and secondary sources. So primary sources are direct sources, in this case from the Middle Ages, from the contemporary period when the events happened. While secondary sources are essentially, books, articles, etc., written about that person by people like me who have gone look at those primary sources or a variety of other secondary sources and draw conclusions and put the whole pieces of the puzzle together that way. Whichever the case, we don't really have those from Kristina much. So that makes things complicated. And actually, I would love to say that there is an abundance of them in Spanish, but the reality of events is that that's also not the case. There are a few of them, the majority of which are very old. The arguments are normally the same. There is nothing new really being showcased in these things. And, well, overall, is really just a pain. In fact, I would tell you a funny story. I actually contacted the archivists in Spain, asking them what I was doing when I originally worked on the paper, like I said, a few years ago, seeing if they could point me in the right direction or if they knew which archive or something where I could find some more stuff, because I was kind of stabbing a bit in the dark. And they pretty much got back to me with saying, sorry, we can't really help you. Good luck with your research. Bye. And I was like, awesome. Well, so here is the thing. People like Kristina are completely buried by bad archiving and historiographical issues. For those of you who don't know what historiography is, let me explain. Historiography is the academic discipline or scholarly subject that actually looks at how history has been treated over time by scholars of the subject. So essentially, in 100 years' time, some dude over a version of YouTube or whatever is it that we're using then will be looking at things like what I'm doing now, and they'll be thinking, oh, okay, this historian looked at history this way and that way, and from them we learned this approach or this methodology, that kind of stuff. That's what I do now with dead dudes, mostly dead dudes, not only dudes, but the majority of the time, which is, by the way, a common problem, because having a very specific gender lens into history often hinders our comprehension of it. And since the vast majority of these sources were often recorded by men, women traditionally end up disappearing from the equation very quickly, particularly in the Middle Ages. Even women who are of royal descent, like Kristina, which perhaps seems, surprising to us, but, erasure has been happening from the beginning of history. This really should not be so surprising. And then we have another problem, which is names. Names and languages are honestly the bane of my existence. As a researcher who does researching in several different languages, not just English or Spanish, this can be a serious problem, and my heart goes out to any linguist out there that goes through the same thing. What is the issue? The vast majority of sources, even in academia, that we have access to come from an Anglocentric perspective, but not all history is written in English, nor is it always well translated or has, a direct equivalent. So this can cause some problems. So the issue that we have in here is that Kristina in the Spanish sources, of course, appears as Kristina de Noruega, first spelling on the slide. Then we have the English sources referring to her as Kristina CH for all of the secondary publications. And then we have the original Norse sources. Overall, she's normally referred to as Kristin or Kristina, but things can kind of flip here and there. So often you are, looking at sources that just give you this one name in a very odd context that you kind of just need to pull together and hope that it's the same person you've been looking at. And actually, this is going to cause a little bit of a confusion, because in our particular time period and in relation to Kristina of Norway, there's actually two women from the same royal family that have the exact same name and that are often referred to as Kristina of Norway. So as you can see, this causes some issues. So again, honestly, if someone out there is trying to get into the field of history, invest in languages. And that's all I can say. It will be very, very helpful. Now, without any further ado, let's start learning more about Kristina specifically. But the Kristina we are not looking out for, the other one. Now, for the purpose of making things a little bit easier for everybody to follow along, from now on, I'm actually going to be using the original Scandinavian names for these two women. So let's start with Kristin Sverresdatter, who is not the woman we're looking for. Well, Kristin Sverresdatter is actually the daughter of Sverre I of Norway. And that man, by the way, is the one you see here on the picture. It's one of the very, very few depictions we have of him. Well, what is the problem with this woman? We don't actually know a lot about her. That's the issue. So she's born late in the 1100s, undescript number to be thrown out there. And we know that then she dies in 1213 while giving birth to her first child. She dies in labor. Now, based on the fact that she had only married in 1208 and that marriage back then tended to happen relatively early in life, Kristin realistically couldn't have been born much earlier than, let's say, 1180 something. Okay, that's roughly the idea that we're working with. And what was the story behind this woman? Well, we know Kristin is the only legitimate child of Sverre I, who was actually part of a new Norwegian dynasty that was reigning at that time, Norway and Scotland, because, you know, for a little while, Norway didn't just own territory in the Norwegian peninsula itself, but abroad. Well, as a result, Sverre comes down in history as one of the most important rulers of Norway overall, but he has a complicated history himself. He was a rebel leader. He was himself the legitimate son of a previous ruler who will take over the country following a civil war. So as you can see, Sverre is not particularly standing on solid ground himself, which is going to put the position of his daughter, you know, even in a more delicate situation. All we know about her is that she's just the daughter of this man, period. That's it. Now, this whole family lineage actually claimed descendants from Harald Fairhair, who is a very important Viking Age ruler in Norway, and essentially being able to claim this link with Harald Fairhair is a way of establishing legitimacy. If you say, oh, hey, I descend from this super cool Viking, essentially everybody kind of wants to be your friend, or at least you can try and manipulate it that way. So, this is a man who is in a relatively tough situation, yet in power, and has a daughter, the only daughter who is their legitimate child. So what's going to happen to Kristin is that she's essentially going to be used as a bargaining chip, as it happens to many, many women, not just during the Middle Ages, but throughout history. So, in 1208, Sverre is going to organize the marriage of his daughter to resolve the ongoing civil war in the country, as she's essentially going to become the wife of the leader of the other faction opposing her father. And that person is going to be Philip Simonsson. As a result, she will become queen consort of the eastern part of Norway until her death. And why do I put emphasis on that? Well, at this moment in time, Norway is not a unified country. It's kind of split in the middle. And Philip Simonsson is going to have control over the eastern part, while Sverre is mostly ruling from the west. And when I say queen consort, it means, yes, she's going to have some power, but she's not going to be the woman calling the shots. The vast majority of her functions are literally just going to be looking for the well-being of the royal family and giving an heir. That's it. That's the purpose of this woman, and that's all we know about her. So, by marrying her father's adversary, this kind of puts an end to that civil war, and everybody's happy as Larry. Or, well, that's more or less the idea. Of course, unfortunately, then she dies in 1213, trying to give birth to the first child of the couple, which, as you can imagine, is not particularly going to help the political situation of Norway. But unfortunately, this is quite a common occurrence in the Middle Ages particularly. So this is what we know of this other Kristina, of Kristin Sverre's daughter. And the reason why things get mixed up and sometimes we get thrown off in the search for Kristina of Norway is because, well, the two women are actually related. And as you can see from the dates that I've put in here, 1234 to 1262, there is actually not that much time passing from the death of one to the birth of the other. So the Kristina we actually want to talk about is Kristina HÅKONSDOTTER, who is the daughter of Håkon IV of Norway. Well, we know roughly as much information as the previous woman, but a bit more because this one gets married, and her whole wedding is actually really going to be the big event. Well, everything that we know about Kristina from the primary sources indicates that she was actually born in Bergen, or just outside of it. And she pretty much disappears from these sources until her marriage to yet another Philip. So for the sake of keeping things easy, I will carry on referring to this Philip by his actual name, which will be the Spanish version of the name, which is Felipe. Now, most of what we know about Kristina comes from a saga, and this saga is essentially the life and reign of her father, Håkon IV of Norway, who is actually considered to have the longest reign in Norway since the time of Harald Fairhair. So again, it's going to be a man in a lineage situation that needs to pull from that dynasty claim to essentially make things easier for him moving forward. Politics is constantly this kind of power play, smoke and mirrors. As you can see, things haven't really changed all that much over time. Now, what we know about the time of Håkon IV is that this is essentially a golden age. At this moment in time, Håkon rules over the British Isles, Norway, Iceland, and Greenland. And when I say the British Isles, not the whole of the British Isles, mostly the domains in the northern part of the British Isles, such as Scotland. Well, he's also quite well revered because this saga that we have about him, the saga of Håkon Håkonsson, very original name as you can see in there, is believed to be actually one of the most accurate in the line of Norwegian kings in history. So overall, we are supposed to be able to believe most of what this tale tells us, with a pinch of salt, obviously. And the thing is that Håkon descends from Sverre I himself. So actually, Kristin and Kristina are related. They are like third time removed cousins, something like that. So imagine this. You're dealing with sources of roughly the same time period, looking for a woman that has the exact same name and that is a member of the royal family involved with a Philip that is going to be a prince. I'm sure you can see how things suddenly get complicated real soon. Well, now that we've sort of removed part of this mystery, let's figure out why she's so important. Well, essentially because she goes off to Spain. Now, this painting is actually from the early 20th century. You have the details there on the slide in case you want to look it up. And what essentially it depicts is Kristina leaving the area of Tønsberg in the summer of 1257. The procession that will go with her in this journey is of over 100 people. And this journey, leaving from Tønsberg, is going to take her over to England, then Normandy, and finally Spain for this marriage. It's kind of quite over the top and ridiculous, to be honest. She will end up having one of the most expensive weddings in European history at the time. So I'm sure you're wondering, well, why don't we know so much more of someone with, such amount of bling? Well, here is the thing. Everything that has to do with Kristina, just like in the case of Kristin earlier, has to do with her father. She's essentially just an accessory. And Håkon is an absolute puppet master. Well, why is this? Essentially, at this moment in time, Håkon needed to boost the power of the Norwegian family in Europe. There was an urge to display legitimacy, quite frankly, because of his lineage. And as a result, we also know that he had actually just gotten into power in 1240 and proclaimed himself ruler, uncontested, of all of Norway. So, having given you a little bit of background of all of this civil war, illegitimate children, etc., that comes directly from his line of ascendancy, for him to be able to have this stability is super important. So essentially, Håkon needs to toot his own horn real big so people actually take him seriously and so that he can actually rule in peace. Well, for this, Håkon is going to need some friends, essentially, because, well, he's not that well known in Europe despite having this kind of tiny empire. At that moment in time, there is going to be one man in Europe who is going to be able to fulfill this friendship that Håkon is so much looking forward to, which is Alfonso X el Sabio, Alphonse X, the wise man of Castile in medieval Spain. Well, this is going to be a period of economic exuberance and of the flourishing of the arts for Castile in Spain at that time as well. It's a bit of a golden age of its own kind during the Reconquista, and it will bring a little bit of stability to a country that has been pretty much just, destroying each other 24/7 for the last 100 years. So Alfonso normally gets pretty good press on Spanish sources. Now we know that during his rule there is going to be what we call the convivencia, which is the the cohabitation of the three peoples, of the three cultures of Iberia, the Christians, Muslim, and Jewish communities, under what we call the Alphonsine court, which really contributed to the development and this exuberance and great stability and amazing things that happened in Spain at the time. So as you can see, Alfonso sounds like a cool guy to be friends with, right? Well, moreover, Alfonso, because of the way Spanish inheritance works, Alfonso descends from the Visigothic kings of Spain who came from the area of Central Europe, and as such, due to the way these Germanic lineages go, he essentially had access to the imperial throne, to the Holy Roman Empire. And we know that at this moment in time, and if you're into video games at all, if you really want to see how this plays out from a practical perspective, I really recommend that you play two video games, either Total War Medieval 2 or Crusader Kings, any of the variants, and you will see exactly how what I'm telling you is true. Because during this time period, the Pope and the Germanic states were essentially at each other's throats. So it becomes very apparent that any Christian ruler of Europe can enhance their status by supporting claims to the throne, to the Holy Roman Empire, or the Pope. You know, it essentially becomes a power game of who do you want to bet for at the horse races. Well, in the case of HÅKON, because of the connections that he has in Europe and what he sees in Alfonso, he thinks that his best bet is to actually provide Alfonso a friendship. And Alfonso needs as many friends as he wants, because the Holy Roman Empires always work on a kind of elective type of rulership, so he essentially needs votes. He needs to campaign, so having an extra vote that he wouldn't be counting on is very handy. So it is essentially a match made in heaven. You know, it's kind of, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. And as a result, Alfonso's claim to the Holy Roman Empire is going to be HÅKON's opportunity to expand his influence in Europe. And this needs to happen through what will be a pretty unlikely and strange marriage. Well, this is where Kristina comes into play. The wedding. So, like I was saying earlier, there is a huge entourage that is going to go with this woman from Norway over to Spain. It included way over 100 people. And these people were not just the maids and general members of the family who would have attended the wedding. It included religious figures, noblemen, perhaps some merchants, you know, people in general that would make noise about this and that would use this opportunity as another, you know, political center to do whatever businesses they have to, not just in Spain, but in all of the countries that they're going to pass through in this long journey. Well, throughout this journey, Kristina is pretty much going to be giving away all kinds of gifts of silver, golds, furs, riches, anything. This act of gift giving is quite popular when we have big marriages like this. They're not necessarily giving gifts to ordinary people, but there is going to be displays of gift given to specific members of society almost in every other main stop in the journey. And this is, you know, also part of the general, I guess, paraphernalia and display that the royalty did back then. They needed to come across as generous, and if you're going away somewhere that, you know, you're not known in or whatever, it's a good way of enhancing your profile, just essentially giving away stuff. Overall, we know that this woman had the most expensive wedding in Europe at that time. Because of the sheer amount of things they were giving away and the people of high profile that were coming into this wedding, it becomes very clear that this is the case. The journey itself takes them well over a year, and in fact, Felipe and Kristina will not get engaged until Ash Wednesday of 1258, and they will get married in Santa Maria la Mayor, which is a church in Valladolid in Spain, which doesn't exactly exist in the shape and form where they married. It kind of got replaced by the cathedral since then, but it was honestly such a huge celebration. Now, after this wedding, and they moved to Seville, and they lived in the palace of Viva Rachel, which doesn't exist anymore. And that's kind of where the story ends. And we think perhaps part of the reason why the story ends there is because the groom was a little bit odd for a groom. Well, this Felipe will be abbot of Covarrubias. And you're probably thinking, well, hang on a moment. I may not know much about history, but I know that members of the clergy are not supposed to marry. You know, the Reformation hasn't happened yet, Lily. What are you going on about? Yes, you heard me well. This man was abbot of Covarrubias, and a very important member of the clergy in Seville, where they were moving to as well. So, why marry a clergyman? Unfortunately for us, the sources are quite dubious about it. Maybe he wanted to leave the church. Maybe. But what's most likely happening here is that the other potential members of the Spanish royal family were just not suitable. And since Philip did not have an interest in the Norwegian throne, he becomes the best pawn to fulfill this. And you're probably wondering, well, why are you going to force two different people into this marriage? Well, you know, this is the Middle Ages, so things don't exactly work like nowadays. But more importantly, the thing is, this was the daughter of one of the main children of the King of Norway. She couldn't just come to Spain and marry a whoever. That would not be a suitable match. In royalty and in general throughout the Middle Ages and throughout history, you normally marry someone of your same status. Now, there are some potential theories which, you know, they are neither here nor there, that originally the marriage was sort of meant to be for Alfonso himself. But Alfonso was already married, even though his marriage wasn't exactly working as he wanted. So, of course, that was not going to work out. And Alfonso and Felipe had another brother, the King of Aragon at the time, who apparently was offered as a potential groom, but there was a huge age gap between Kristina and this man, and she apparently refuses. If we believe the sagas and the sources, it seems that Håkon gives her a choice, and she kind of goes like, no, I'm not marrying a guy who's 30 years older than me. Not because 30 years is a unusual gap back then, but apparently just because she didn't want that. So, if you think about it, and you're already starting to scratch down the barrel, you've moved away from child number 1 to child number 2. After child number 2, the status of the majority of princes and princesses in Europe kind of starts dying down. You know, you're the leftovers, you're the later children. You still have power, but not as much power. And why is that? Because the farther down you are into the line of inheritance, the least likely that you are to access power. And it's quite common, actually, in medieval families at this moment in time, that after the second child, the third child onwards, they are people that are destined to the clergy. Why is that? Because when you actually access the church, you have to refuse your claim to the throne. You have now dedicated your life to God. That's it. You can still become a very powerful man through the church, so you're not really going to be losing status, but you cannot become king. So, here is where the conundrum comes from. Did Felipe never actually want to be a member of the church, and he just ends up there because essentially he just gets told, well, this is tough luck. This is what's coming your way. Or is it a matter of he was destined for that life anyway, had settled quite comfortably that way, but when this situation comes up, Alfonso realizes he really needs to pull something out of the hat. Otherwise, this whole marriage and potential alliance is just going to fall through. So he invalidates or takes out his brother out of the church to essentially say, okay, well, bro, you're now going to marry this princess. Hallelujah. We are not entirely sure. And I cannot actually confirm one way or another. But what happens after this may give you a couple of ideas, and it's entirely up to you to make up your mind. I say this in all honesty because I don't have the actual answer for you. All I can give you is the few details that we have, which is the fact that, well, after this whole marriage, things just go a little bit strange. Well, this is the chapel to St. Olaf, which is built nearby Covarrubias, where Felipe was actually the abbot of. And I'm sure you can notice that this is not a medieval chapel. This was actually built in 2011 by the Fundación Princesa Kristina de Norway, meaning the Foundation Princess Kristina of Norway, which was actually established in 1992 with the aim to strengthen the relationship between Spain and Norway. And you're probably wondering, that seems a bit random. Well, yes and no. 1992 is going to be the very first time where Spain is going to have a proper socialist government. So there were a lot of things that start flourishing from the point of view of culture, society, and heritage to attempt to create other relations to Europe and to start sort of exploring Spain and its history and its past. So this is precisely the moment in time when finding someone like Kristina to link with, you know, big democratic sort of regimes in social Europe in the north, like Norway, was a good thing for the Spanish political agenda. Well, why does it get built? Is it just at random? No. Here is the thing. We know Kristina actually asked her husband to build it in the Middle Ages when they get married. And the Spanish sources say that this was granted, so pretty much yes, dear, no problem, just tell me what you want and we'll get it done. And then there is not a single source, no archive, no evidence whatsoever that this church was ever built. That's a bit weird, isn't it? So what's the deal? Well, everything is essentially just propaganda, guys. The chronicle that is written from the point of view of Norway was done under the commission of Magnus, who was Kristina's brother and who was the direct successor of King Håkon. So essentially, he writes this whole thing to glorify his father, because if he glorifies his father and it looks cool, then Magnus himself by proxy is gaining legitimacy and status, and kind of so is his sister in the process. So in a way, they kind of present us this idea of Kristina as a romantic medieval court character, and her life just kind of becomes a fairy tale, essentially. So are we close to the truth? Well, considering we don't actually have all those many details, no. But it's hard to tell. It's very hard to tell, essentially. Well, the reason why the church is built is essentially to honor that promise that Felipe never actually fulfilled and the legacy of Kristina. Why was the chapel so important for someone like Kristina? Well, consider that this woman was coming to an entirely new society to which she was a foreigner. Although she came here with an entourage of 100 people, a year after the marriage, those people actually left the country. They went back to Norway, and she's pretty much just left in Spain on her own, which must have been very daunting. So building a church was a way in which this woman could have a relationship with back home, because St. Olaf is an important Norwegian saint. So it's a way of establishing those direct connections with her homeland, but also a way of kind of trying to carve a corner for herself, you know, a bit of a niche where she could at least establish some authority or be relevant somehow. Particularly because, as we're going to see, something seems to happen after this marriage, part 2. Well, this is her tomb in Covarrubias. Now, for someone with such an expensive wedding and extensive details of it, Kristina fades into the background real soon. We know that she dies childless. The groom didn't seem to have loved her very much, and she dies 4 years after their marriage. So as you can see, both women actually suffer a very similar fate. Now, why do I say that the groom didn't seem to love her very much? Well, the thing is, the sources are still a little bit tepid about it, but it kind of seems that once they move into Seville, Felipe goes back to do business in the church, which is the reason why he continues being out of Covarrubias, at least in some capacity, and that's the reason why the burial of his wife is there, even though she never went there, as far as we're concerned, which is a little bit weird. We know that she actually dies in Seville, and her husband buries her in the old Abbey of Covarrubias. Supposedly, she was the victim of a heat stroke, according to the Chronica of the reign of King Alfonso. Okay, yeah, I can believe that someone coming from Norway, particularly, you know, back then, would suffer some severe climate issues while moving to Seville, when in the summer particularly it can be a place where heat stroke happens even in this day and age. Of course, I can buy that. But are you sincerely telling me that a royal princess was completely left unattended to the point that she would suffer a severe heat stroke and no one would notice? Well, that seems... I mean, of course it happened. I'm not suggesting this is not a conspiracy theory, but it seems a little bit unusual because these women tend to be, you know, supported by maids and other members of the court. Even if you're a lowly princess, you have somebody there making sure that you're, you know, given water and some food and with a parasol to make sure that you are not catching any sun. It's a little bit bizarre. Happened, perhaps, but a little bit bizarre. As we start digging into the burial of Kristina, because this was quite controversial for a while, we start finding a few more things. There was a later discovery in her tomb, which was done a bit more recently. And as we actually dig into the tomb, we actually find out that she was buried with a piece of parchment that had a remedy for ear pain that actually dates from the Viking Age. And we know that it dates from the Viking Age, confirming that this is obviously in relationship to Kristina and not somebody else's, because her burial has actually been suggested to be somebody else's, is because of the of the ingredients that actually are written into the piece of parchment. They do not correspond with what would have been cultivated in Spain at the time, or what would have been traditional to apply for somebody with that kind of, illness in Spain at the time. It's much more common of Northern Europe and of, well, many years prior to Kristina. Now, an ear infection can be a symptom for many things, and given the sort of heat stroke description, the ear infection, etc., we kind of start putting together that perhaps what she actually died of was meningitis. Now, meningitis is, even nowadays, a very devastating disease. That's the reason why we get babies vaccinated, when they are born with that, because it can be incredibly nasty even in this day and age. Imagine back then. That would make some more sense. That would make some more sense that she died of something like that, and that's the reason why it happens so suddenly. But, well, anyway, all of this was still generally contested for quite some time. And part of the reason why this was contested for quite some time is because, well, we had some issues with the veracity of the tomb, you see. Despite it seems a bit weird that a random woman from apparently Norway was buried in COVARRUBIAS, the very place where that woman seems to have married the abbot of, the tests that were originally done to identify this tomb were actually done in the 50s, in the middle of the Franquist dictatorship of Spain. Now, of course, Franco had an agenda, and as a result, it was thought for many years that this was not the actual person we were looking for. This was just entirely fabricated so that Franco could use some link to the Aryan race to promote, fascism in Spain, yada, yada, yada. Well, of course, I can understand why there would be such a debate or issue with this, because we know that Franco actually did that a lot with many things, the dictatorship of Spain, so the rewriting of history, destruction of history, and, well, a bunch more other things in not just the Middle Ages, but throughout time. But the thing is, now the Fundación Princesa Kristina de Noruega has gone and done more tests, which kind of, puts us in the clear. And more importantly, what the archaeology shows is that we have a female skeleton of about 170 centimeters. Even if you're not very good with maths, I'm going to tell you. The average woman in Spain, as a Spanish woman who I am, although not average, because I'm shorter than usual, the average woman in Spain is shorter, even currently, than 170 centimeters. Let alone in the Middle Ages, where, although not by a huge margin, people would have been slightly shorter. 170 centimeters is much more aligned with the general idea of measurements that we have for people in Scandinavia in this day and age, and back in the Middle Ages too. So, if it's not Kristina, then it's obviously a very random, tall person that seems to have come potentially from another part of Europe that we end up having here, if you see what I mean. It seems like a strange coincidence to match, several criteria that obviously links us with this. But more importantly, there is a 19th century manuscript that actually says the tomb of Kristina was there before Franco or anyone else gets involved in the subject and potentially disturbs the whole thing. Some people still question the veracity of it all. Some people question whether this is completely fabricated even nowadays, etc., to be able to promote this idea of the foundation. But I mean, it's a skeleton of a woman that meets certain criteria, that has a tie with this abbey that we don't have any other record of in the abbey, apart from her relationship to the abbot, who happens to be the very husband of the woman whose identity we're trying to find out. We can argue semantics as much as you want, but I think it's pretty clear why she's buried here and how she ends up there. Well, the further theories that we're still not entirely sure of is, how does it all come to such a tragic end? Well, it seems that, like I said, Felipe didn't really love her very much. The fact that they died childless suggests that there was a problem in the marriage. So either the marriage was not, consummated properly, or there was some case of infertility, which could be her, or considering this man had followed an monastic education for several years of his life, perhaps he was just simply very chaste. If this is the case, this promotes the idea further that they pull Felipe out of the church, out of his, out of this necessity that Alfonso has, not necessarily because of his free will. there are obviously many problems. Even though meningitis can be a very aggressive illness, it's so strange that we don't have any evidence of or proper evidence of this woman being taken care of, or doctors having gone to see her, or things like this, which you would expect. Again, the royal family would keep records for this, there would be physicians checking into her, etc, etc. And again, it's just so incredibly weird that the remedy for the illness that we find inside her tomb is relating to the Viking Age. So what kind of comes across, and this kind of gets into the realm of speculation, but at some point, because we are losing sources, we kind of have to take a stab in the dark. What kind of comes across is that this woman gets completely abandoned after having become a piece of someone else's puzzle, because she's now fulfilled her purpose. There is now an alliance between Spain and Norway. Everyone wins except Kristina. She's just abandoned, completely left to her own devices in a foreign land where no one seems to really care about her. She would have been probably, an exotic woman to be enamored of, and that's kind of it. Seville was a very busy town at this moment in time, had always been one of the most important cities in Europe. The fascination would run its course very quickly. So I think this really tells the story of a woman who was isolated, who was maybe lonely, and that unfortunately just is representative of many other women, and not just women, but people throughout time, that just get completely buried by the sources because she didn't achieve anything remarkable other than marrying this guy. That's it. We don't really get to hear from them. And because on top of that she was a woman and therefore perceived to be not as relevant, and she dies without children, which again kind of adds scores against her, she just ends up in this very tragic situation where it's taken an entire foundation and some historical and archaeological work done in the end of the 20th century to actually bring her back to the light. If you're interested, the Fundación Kristina of Norway actually has a very good website that you can check, and I will put in the link of this video so you can learn a bit more about her. But this is the sad story of Kristina, and the reason why I want to tell you about it, because like I said, this is representative not just of this woman, but of many things that happen to people in history. And it's also representative of what happens to a lot of things that we try to do as historians. Sometimes we think we're going to find gold, and actually we hardly ever do. We end up finding just, bits and bobs. That's the reason why we don't always have full answers for history, because those full answers don't always exist. They are, pieces of parchment that we need to put together without having proper context. So if you're ever wondering why we just don't have all of this abundance of details about people, well, you see, there are far too many problems that can happen in one string of research to be able to actually put everything in place. And on that front, this is all for now. Like I said, there is going to be coming up the video essay with the narration of the paper as I originally made it, so you can see the difference between what it's like to give a presentation like this and just throw you all of my academic jargon, and so you can get a few more details that I didn't necessarily perceive was important for people to see in this presentation, to actually learn about this woman, what happens to her, and why this is important and something we should talk more about. And on that front, well, thank you so much. Below, like I said, you can find the link for the Fundación Princesa Kristina of Norway, as well as the ways in which you can support this channel, because like I said, as much as we do everything that we can to make everything accessible for the public, this pretty much runs with the donations of all of our amazing supporters. So thank you so much for all of our supporters on Buy Me a Coffee for keep on doing this. The link is actually at the bottom, and so is the way of contributing through PayPal for our sponsors on PayPal. Thank you so much, and have a lovely rest of your day. Bye bye.